Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Sunny Fighter Podcast. If you're new here, I love to just talk about the fights, about MMA, UFC, boxing, and what we get into on the show is we get into the psychology of the fighters. Um, we don't really analyze the fights all that much. There will be a little bit of that because I love this game, but we talk a little bit about the psychology. And through the psychology, we make predictions of what's going to happen in fights. But I also love to break down, what happened, like after a fight, what happened building up to the fight, and how people handle themselves after, and then just some miscellaneous stuff too. So let's get started. UFC 253. It happened last week. Israel Adesanya, Paulo Costa. Yeah, so that fight was insane. That fight was crazy, man. Um, Israel was. So one thing I love to do is I watch the embeddeds and the UFC embedded leading up to a pay per view like that, and it was really interesting to see. There were a bunch of interesting data points that one could gather just from a psychological perspective and use those to try to make a prediction of what's going to happen. Um, and this is other than like the actual skill set of what actually went down. And yeah, so with Israel, what I saw happen, um, Israel was super cool, calm, centered. Um, Whereas the things, and Israel was obviously talking shit. He always has been talking shit. I did honestly think he was a bit more cocky than usual. He's always cocky, but he was very much just being himself. Whereas Paulo Costa, I feel like we don't really know too much of him, to be honest. But he was fucking making some skit of Israel running around the cage. Another guy, he just got another dude who looked like Israel, running around the cage and chasing him. That kind of reminds me of that dumb shit that some of these other fighters have done in the past to try to get Conor McGregor's fights. And this guy's already scheduled to fight Israel, but he still was doing that shit. And now what's funny is Israel posted that on Instagram saying, "This is how to not train for a fight." um, I think one thing that was a bit of a tell for me that it was going to go the way it did, where Israel won the fight, was when Paulo Costa handed out the white belt to Israel. And I think Israel just grabbing it with one hand, smacking Paulo Costa in the face with the other hand. If you guys saw that clip, that happened during the face off, um, you could just see a shock in Paulo Costa's face. You know, and and now why does that lead to him not making it, not being successful in this fight? I think because it was like he didn't see it coming. Almost, he was shocked. Whereas it's funny, like he did that and definitely would have been a blow to Israel's ego, but Israel saw it coming. Israel already asked him, pointed at it, was like, "Oh, black belt." He pointed at it, but Paulo Costa was just mentally shocked, and I think honestly, what I would assume happened was Paulo Costa's camp, that little guy with the white glasses, that short dude, King of Cringe. He's a coach of King of Cringe. Um, he's a funny guy, but he's just kind of, I don't know how good that guy is. I mean, obviously he was good with your boy. What's his name? Triple C, Henry Cejudo. But I think honestly he just told Paulo Costa like, hey, maybe you should give him the white belt. Maybe get in his head, give him the white belt. And I think Paulo Costa just went with it, thinking, didn't thinking it through. I guess what would happen, and Israel just smacked him in the face with it. So that was interesting. So moving on to the co-main event, Dominic Reyes and Jan Blachowicz. Honestly, I could have put money on this one. And I'm not talking from skill set. I'm just talking from hearing what they were saying before the fight and their body language. Dominic Reyes, maybe he just doesn't like to be in front of the camera and the UFC embedded. He was just like, it was almost like he was talking in rehearsal. It wasn't genuine. Whereas Jan, as he was talking, it you can just feel the genuineness, if that's a word. Whereas Dominic Reyes, it was just like kind of just going through the motions. And another thing that somebody mentioned, which makes a ton of sense, is I think going into this fight, I think Dominic Reyes, in his mind, he thought that he was already a champion. And I know people say, like, just kind of visualize you're already the champion and go into fights and go into competition. But I think he did it in a not so much of a constructive way. I think he did it in a way where he went in, everybody's telling him, like, yeah, dude, you beat Jon Jones. You're fucking killing it. And I think because of that, I wonder if he didn't take Jan as seriously. You know, and I'm sure, like, when he fought Jon Jones, he probably fucking trained like a mother effer and went crazy in the training. Whereas I feel like in this one, Jan isn't that well known. He's not the quote-unquote GOAT as Jon Jones is. Yeah, and you could just see that in Dominic's body language. But every interview I saw with Jan, you just saw this dude who was so fucking determined. Okay, what else? So nothing more on that card. Another thing that's been going on in the headlines. Just want to talk about maybe a couple current events, and then we'll get into next fights that are coming down the pipe. One thing I mentioned before was how people handle losses and how that goes, and just analyzing that. And I think one of the things I had mentioned in one of the previous episodes was how Sugar Sean O'Malley handled his loss with Chito Vera. In one of the previous podcasts on the fight in previous fight cards, that fight that DC fought at. I guess that was 252, or was it 251? Let's see. Yeah, that was 252. Yeah, your boy got TKO'd first round. And the way I watched his podcast just leading out of it, and it seems like he just keeps crying about how he lost, and he keeps almost making excuses rather than taking a loss. He keeps saying, he's like, my leg gave out. It wasn't even a fight. But that's what a fight is. Your leg gave out. The guy was effective, or he got lucky. But the cage door closed, and you couldn't defend this guy. And if the referee didn't stop him, he probably would have truly knocked you out. And it kills me to say that because I love Sean O'Malley, to be honest. But he was kind of handling it in a way where, after the fight, now many weeks have gone by. That was August 15th, and now it's October 1st right now. So many weeks have gone by. But every episode that he did on his own podcast, on his own YouTube channel, he just kept saying how he's just like, that wasn't a fight, what the fuck? I know you guys hate me. And first and a lot of people are saying, Sean, take your loss like a man. Take your loss like a man. But I think as I've just continued to watch him, I'm realizing actually he's handling it in a very authentic way. He's handling it in a way that he handles it for himself. And I think there's genuineness in that. Where like, it's almost like it definitely hurts that he lost, that he's undefeated, but he continues to make fun of himself as well, which I think is beautiful. So shout out to Sean O'Malley. I think he's gonna come back strong. And to be honest, like, listen, 10 out of 10 times, if he fights Vera, I don't know. I think based on everything we've seen, I'm inclined to say Sean O'Malley wins. But yes, we'll see how that one goes. If they fight again or what Sean O'Malley fights at. Looking forward to Sean O'Malley's comeback. Alright, so what's coming up next? Oh yeah, another current event. Your boy Conor McGregor. I couldn't do a UFC podcast, MMA podcast, without mentioning Conor McGregor, who hasn't fought in 9 months. But it's just like we always got to mention Conor McGregor to get some views and likes, huh? The YouTube algorithm must just love Conor McGregor. Yeah. So Conor, what he did is he went out and revealed his conversation with Dana, and he has been trying to do a charity match with Dustin Poirier, and he's saying that he's really trying to get a fight, and he's trying to like show that he's got this tussle with Dana, saying that Dana's lying. Now, I've got my aluminum hat on. You can't see it. It's invisible. My aluminum foil hat on. My conspiracy theory hat on. I realize you just can't buy into any of this shit. I like, who knows how much of that stuff is actually true? Who knows that Connor and Dana are actually not on the phone together and saying like, yeah, put out those screenshots. It will cause headlines. It will keep you relevant. Because Dana knows Connor's a fucking money maker. Clearly wants to get him a fight, and also makes sense why they wouldn't necessarily want to do a Conor fight, because fucking Conor sells out the stadiums. So if there's no conspiracy theory going on, I think, let's assume everything's genuine, I think what your boy Conor is doing is he's just doing a bunch of tactics to try to get more power from Dana. Power away from Dana and into Conor's hands. Showing that, hey, I'm your biggest star. I can do whatever the fuck I want. I can expose you by posting. I don't need you, you need me. I think he definitely genuinely wants to fight. I do not doubt that at all. I would love to see him fight. It was just funny as everybody just keeps playing along like, yeah, get Conor a fight. Who really knows what's going on? So anyway, that was our check in the box talk about Conor McGregor. Alright, fights coming up. Let's do some quick predictions. And who knows, maybe next week these predictions are going to change. We got some good fights. We got Holly Holm versus Irene Aldana happening. So I saw some previews of this one. I've noticed whenever Holly Holm looks really happy before a fight, she kills it. But I do think there's always a glass ceiling. No matter how happy, no matter how good she's feeling, if the skill set is outmatched, you're outmatched by age, you're just gonna get defeated. And this Irene girl, she's not a young cat either. She's 32. I mean, that's young for this game still. Maybe at the prime age. I saw a bunch of Irene's knockouts, and she's a serious, seems like a serious striker. So I think Irene might take that. Actually, I'm gonna go with Irene on that one. I don't know anybody else on here. Julia Pena versus Jermaine Durandamy. I don't know enough about it to make a prediction. Oh, your boy Carlos Condit is fighting. That's gonna be interesting. Your boy's back. What else we got? Got Marlon Moraes, Corey Sanhagen, interesting. Brian Ortega versus Chan Sung Jung. Okay. Khabib versus Justin Gaethje. Robert Whittaker versus Jared Cannonier. Yeah, so let's talk about this one real quick. What's interesting about Robert Whittaker is he's on an upswing. He took some time off and he came back and he just destroyed Darren Till. Played a great tactical match for Darren Till and defeated him. Jared Cannonier, as amazing he is, he's had a lot of success. But I think this one tips towards Robert, not from a skill set perspective, but from the perspective of Israel made this huge hype that Jared Cannonier's next if he wins, defeating Robert decisively. Thing is, though, I feel like that adds more pressure on Jared. And I just don't know if he'll be able to just kind of block all that out and just focus on Robert. I feel like with that, you can start to kind of like look through Robert a bit and be like, oh yeah, it's just Robert. I'm headed to the title shot, so I feel like that could happen. Your boy Khabib, let's see, Khabib versus Justin Gaethje. Yeah, that one's interesting too. And I just saw their little virtual press conference. Man, Khabib always just looks so fucking focused. But I feel like definitely that matchup is real interesting, right? And if anybody's gonna beat Khabib, it's gonna be Justin Gaethje. I think with Khabib having dealt with the loss of his father, and also I feel like him being in Fight Island, which is a Arabic Central Islamic place. I think Khabib probably also partially feels home there. He feels good being there. Has probably a lot of support. I don't know what the Fight Island bubble is like, but I think he's going to be super motivated and have something to prove, because of the death of his father. Again, who knows how that affects his coaching? But I feel like from a motivation standpoint, I mean, it could go either way. He could just be like, I don't feel like working. My father's not here. That could happen. I do wonder, when there's a champion for so long like that who remains undefeated, I wonder if Khabib eventually starts to buy into his own hype. And I wonder if that's happening. So we'll have to see. He's super confident, but I just wonder at what point he starts to buy into his own hype. And I wonder if that's happening this time or not. Justin Gaethje, on the other hand, I think he's got nothing to lose. He's just jumping up. He's been watching Khabib for a long time, and he's ready for it. So, quick bonus, I want to shout out Michael Chandler. I mean, talk about mindset. That dude Michael Chandler should be a motivational speaker. He's amazing, man. Even though he's supposed to be the backup for this fight versus Khabib versus Justin, and he is just looking at it as, he's like, I'm preparing, majority of my preparation, 80% of it is just towards myself, and I've been watching Khabib for a long time, and he ideally would want to fight Khabib, but he has to fight Justin, he'll fight Justin. So I feel like what Michael Chandler's psychology is just, that sounds bulletproof. I mean, let's see if things do end up occurring where one of these, Khabib or Justin, pull out and Michael jumps in, and we'll have to see his performance. But just the way he answers the media's questions, and the way he's just, he seems amazing. He seems very bulletproof mentally, and very, very, very incredibly positive. and motivated too. And I think that's another thing too. If you're preparing for a specific fighter, there's a very clear motivation. And I wonder if you're just preparing as a backup fighter, that motivation really needs to be just come from within to just truly, genuinely love the game and just be ready for anything. And I feel like it's when it's those kind of fighters, those are the guys that end up killing it and winning no matter what. When you just prepare for anything. Because anything could happen in a fight, especially a fucking MMA fight. And it kind of reminds you of, Conor McGregor when he was going to be fighting Jose Aldo, and Jose Aldo pulled out because of a rib injury or whatever, and your boy Chad Mendez rolled in there. And then Conor had not been preparing for a wrestler and took that fight at 2 weeks' notice. So, it's pretty badass. That did not pay out for Conor with Nate Diaz, but still. So I that's interesting what Michael Chandler's doing. Anyway, I think that's it for me for now. We'll do another episode, obviously, coming up soon. But I wanted to get this one out there because this one was quite interesting. I think that's it. No other topics of discussion. Yeah. That'll do it. Oh, yeah, and I guess maybe one thing to point out just about Israel. Everybody's just talking about, like, hey, Israel, you doing these kind of... After he beat Paulo Costa, saying, hey, man, you doing all these celebrations, humping Paulo Costa, doing this shit, pretending to come on his coaches. What the fuck are you doing? What the fuck are you guys saying? This is a raw fucking sport where emotions and physical abilities are on. They're just... And adrenaline is through the roof. So people fucking get KO'd, for God's sakes. People get knocked out. Consciousness skips a beat. This is a ridiculous sport. And consciousness skipping a beat is an accepted turnout, and it happens very regularly. Whether it's through a submission or through a knockout. This is a rough fucking sport. It's a raw sport. So I feel like in Jorge Masvidal's words, if you don't like it, maybe watch soccer. Yeah. Oh, of course, it's not professional for the sport. It doesn't have a good look. If somebody's new to MMA, they see that and they get turned off. Maybe they just appreciate violence and they get turned off from the humping. I guess it could be a... But I honestly believe a lot of people that tune in is because there's just something about the rawness of it they just love. Alright. Peace, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'll be doing more of these episodes. I'm going to start doing via video because I just feel like more connection. Put it on YouTube. Cut it up into pieces maybe.